All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, coming your way on a Wednesday night. It's 7 o'clock Eastern time, and we are firing up the live stream as we do each and every Wednesday. So for the rest of the summer, again, our summer schedule leading into week one of college football is 4 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday, 6 o'clock on Monday, 7 o'clock on Wednesday and Thursday. And you know me well enough to know that I just can't stop talking college football, so we strike up the live streams more than that. But those are the guaranteed live streams on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Of course, the audio versions of all the content here that you find on YouTube and elsewhere is at Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. Just search Mark Rogers TV. You can support the channel by finding the Amazon links in the description section below. You don't have to purchase anything that we have on display there. Just use the links to purchase whatever you want. So we know that just about everybody in America seems to be shopping on Amazon. Just grab the link. Nothing else changes. Just go and enter into Amazon via the links down below and go wild and do whatever you typically do. And then also our mailing list, which is growing by the day. You got to jump on the mailing list because beginning week one, that following Monday of the Thursday through Saturday games, and of course, that week one, we've got a Sunday big matchup, LSU Miami, and we've got Virginia Tech, Florida State. But that Monday, we will start to deliver our weekly mailing out to our Mark Rogers TV insiders with stats and trends and notes and facts that you will not find anywhere else. My perspective on the college football weekend and a channel update. All right, let's get to the business at hand, and that's Oklahoma football. Of course, coming off a near miss of the college football championship game at the Rose Bowl against Georgia. We bring in Jason Ray from college football, from Last Word on college football. Jason, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, Mark. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Jason, your first time to Mark Rogers TV. We welcome you and hope you come back. So Oklahoma, of course, a major player in all of this, as they typically are. And looking at what's been talked about in the offseason, there's been a lot of hype about West Virginia, with Will Grier being the best and most experienced quarterback coming back to the conference. Texas, considering Tom Herman's track record and looking good in spots and playing really well defensively last year, and maybe they make the jump to challenge Oklahoma. But when it came right down to it, Jason, when the media had to select at Big 12 Media Days who's going to win the Big 12, it was still an Oklahoma beyond a landslide, just a demolition of the competition.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, that the track record for Oklahoma speaks for itself. Specifically, what Bob Stoops built at Oklahoma over the last, the last decade plus. And then, Riley kind of just taking it on from there, and really not missing a beat. Obviously there's some question marks for this Oklahoma Sooner team this year, right? I mean, there's the biggest question mark obviously is at the quarterback position. You don't lose a player like Baker Mayfield and expect to be better or even just as good. I mean, we look at, as you followed Baker's career, especially at Oklahoma over the last 3 years, he's been everything that you would hope for in a quarterback, in a leader, in a professional, and carrying that team. I think one of the biggest things that this team is going to miss on the offensive side of the ball is certainly his play on the field. He's a generational quarterback, the #1 draft pick in the latest NFL draft, the Heisman Trophy winner last year. But I think the intangibles are going to be one of the things that they're really going to miss on the offensive side of the ball. Kyler Murray is more of a quiet, reserved leader from his perspective. He's kind of a leader by example guy, where everybody that watched Baker last year, he's very much the rah, get your teammates excited. So there's certainly a lot of question marks both on the offense and defensive side of the ball. But in terms of the winning the last 4 Big 12 championships in a row, for Oklahoma, that's something that speaks for itself.
We have seen coaches all over the nation in quarterback situations in which they seem cut and dry. Michigan being the last one that I saw, Jim Harbaugh on the record just as of yesterday saying, hey, it's a wide open competition. We've got 5 guys competing. It's wide open. They're all so impressive, when we know that Shea Patterson is the transfer to Michigan with all the fanfare for good reason that he should be the guy. And unless there's just completely unforeseen play at August camp, that Shea Patterson will be the guy. So I've heard this from a number of coaches this season and every season that try to make it stand out as a quarterback competition. And I understand why. I understand the politics of it. I understand the message to the competitors, especially when you're bringing in someone new that doesn't have any experience. And why should they be given the job when they haven't proven anything at this level, or at least here? Kyler Murray's just a dynamic athlete, one of the great athletes in the country, and just measuring sheer athleticism. A bit different than Baker Mayfield from that standpoint, even though Baker Mayfield an exceptional athlete as well. But seems as though Lincoln Riley, based on what you told me before we jumped on board here, is ready to make that statement and that decision known to the public here pretty soon.
Yeah, I think that's right, Mark. I think what Lincoln talked about a little bit today was that he was ready to make a decision, most likely first of next week, but potentially at the end of this week. But given the way that they do things, I think he's probably going to get a good look from their. I think they're going to have their second major scrimmage of the fall camp on Saturday and see how things pan out from there. But yeah, I think it was a little bit surprising, but also not surprising at the same time through media days that, Riley said he was very quick to dismiss that Kyler Murray was just the assumed starter, right? So very much, like you mentioned, I think college football coaches are very, very close to the chest as far as that goes. Don't want to certainly, I think, to your point, definitely understand why they do what they do. In terms of keeping that, you don't want to give certainly don't want to give your opponent any advantage going in. But I think it was like I said, a little bit of surprise, and I think it took a lot of Sooner fans. It didn't took them back a little bit, but a little surprised to think, okay, Kyler Murray not really gave up, but he delayed his Oakland A's baseball career and his $4.6 million to set the bench, in this year. So it's not one of those things that I think Sooner fans really completely take seriously. I think it's just putting it this way. I think I would be very surprised to not see Kyler Murray as a starting quarterback. But again, I think your backup is one turned ankle away from for me and the guy. So you certainly have to have somebody ready. But come September 1st against Florida Atlantic, it would be a major surprise to not see Kyler Murray running out there.
Jason Ray joins us from Last Word on College Football to break down the Oklahoma Sooners with the Florida Atlantic game, a fairly intriguing one to open up play in Norman September 1st. Yeah, it's a unique position when you talk about quarterback for so many reasons, but in this situation in particular, in regards to the least important guy on the roster, as long as the starting quarterback's healthy, is the backup quarterback, because you don't need to rotate him. It's not like a fifth or sixth or seventh defensive lineman or offensive lineman where they need to stay fresh, or any other position, because you don't need him to play any meaningful. But as soon as you get an injury, he is the most important person on the roster, because now he is playing the most important position and taking over there. I'm looking at the stats, Jason, and what I see is obviously Baker Mayfield was by far the best player in the country in regards to the players that are eligible for the Heisman Trophy. We're not going to get into the lineman debate, but in regards to skill position players, he was the guy. Right. He accounted for 48 touchdowns last year. That's 43 through the air, 48 total, 5 on the ground. And I would say starting in 2015, after that 14 season in which TCU and Baylor tied for the Big 12, it's been an Oklahoma-dominated conference. They just haven't won the Big 12. They have been clearly the best team. They beat TCU by 3 or 4 scores, and it wasn't much of a game into the third quarter last year. Pretty much the same thing the year before, after they lost early to Houston and Ohio State. They rampaged their way through the Big 12, didn't lose a game. Same thing in 15, one stub of the toe against Texas. Otherwise, they're by far the best team. So they don't need a Baker Mayfield performance necessarily, do I think. You're going to correct me here, or at least correct me if needed, because you know the personnel. But I'm just trying to get a statistical sense of what we can expect Kyler Murray to do and what he needs to do. He doesn't need to score 48 touchdowns, I don't think, but because the personnel has been so much better than the competition. But, what he needs to do for Oklahoma to remain the number one team in the Big 12.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mark. And I think the thing to keep in mind is Kyler Murray is not going into this with the cupboard bare, so to speak, on the offensive side of the ball. He has a lot of talent returning. There's a couple of couple of players on the offensive line that they're going to have to replace. Orlando Brown and Eric Wren are graduated and off to the NFL. So there's a little bit of battle there. I think there's some shuffling that's going to have to happen to make that work. But they got a lot of good players that have played a lot of time. The only player that may not have supported the team last year was Creed Humphrey, redshirt freshman that looks the part as the center. He's in the battle with Jonathan Alvarez for that starting position at the center position. From a skill position perspective, Rodney Anderson was one of the better dual catching and running backs the last half of the year. Played very well against Georgia, over 200 yards on the ground in that Rose Bowl game. So you look, it's going to be a different kind of an offense, right? So you're not going to see, I think Oklahoma's probably in trouble if you see Kyler Murray throwing 35, 40 balls a game, right? I think you're going to look and you're going to see a different dynamic. You'll see Rodney Anderson, you'll see Trey Sermon, you'll see a lot more zone read. You'll see Kyler run the ball a lot more than what you saw Baker run the ball. Then I think one of the things that comes off the screen, Kyler didn't get a lot of time last year, but after the Kansas game where Baker was suspended for that first series, you saw a little bit of a glimpse of what Kyler brings to the game in terms of his speed. He took a zone read and he took it, I think, 60, 70 yards down to the inside the 5. So that's something that you look. Baker was quick, but I think Kyler's next level quick in terms of his athleticism and being able to get in space. So I think it'll be interesting how teams defend Oklahoma to start the year. I would think from a defensive perspective that they'll try to load the box a little bit, thinking that Oklahoma's going to rely on the run game with Sermon and with Rodney Anderson and Kyler Murray, but Oklahoma still has those receivers from last year. Marquise Brown's returning, C.D. Lamb's returning. They do lose the Mackey Award winner, Mark Andrews, from a tight end position, but Grant Calcaterra, who played a little bit last year, made a good touchdown reception against TCU in the game in Norman early in the year. But the supporting cast is there for Kyler, so absolutely, he's not gonna. He's not going to be asked to, throw for 3,500 yards and 35 to 40 touchdowns. But I think I think it's fair to expect a 2,000-yard season. 20 to 22 touchdown passes, and then another. Look for another 600 to 700 yards on the ground as well.
Yeah, I don't want to make the complete correlation to the LSU situation over the last number of years in which they have declined and needed that quarterback to play well on offense, because their defense for that most of that time post 2011 has been outstanding, loaded with NFL players, and Oklahoma obviously needs more from its offense. But Kyler Murray, if he rushes for 75 or 80 yards in the typical game and splashes for 130 or 140 here and there, and as long as he doesn't turn it over and he makes big plays in the passing game, he doesn't need to be, I don't think, a 65, 68% passer, but he can't be a 51% passer and be throwing for 110 yards and turning the ball over. Of course, maybe more in the high 50s to 60% range, depending on what they do with the passing game and what they ask him to do. And if he throws for, $175, but it's efficient with a score or two, and he makes like 3 or 4 huge plays in the game against the better opponents, that may be enough right there to get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think one of the things that has been noticed out of fall camp is what you would expect. The defense is a little bit ahead of the offense, and that's certainly typical for fall camps around the country. If your offense is consistently beating your defense in fall, you probably have a little bit of a problem on your hands come September. But yeah, absolutely. I think Riley's going to put him in the best position for him to be successful as as the starter. And one of the things that is always interesting to kind of think about, and how Baker came to Oklahoma, as a walk on and no scholarship, and where Kyler Murray was. I mean, he was a legend in high school, high school football, Texas, at Allen, Texas. The #1 player in the country, went to Texas A&M, and then then transferred over to Oklahoma. So yeah, I think Riley is certainly going to put him in a position to be successful. And I think one of the things that that I've heard coming out of fall camp is what he's putting more emphasis on more than anything is you're going to make mistakes. These things are going to happen. Every ball is not going to be great, but limit your turnovers just as much as you can. And I think one of the things that's really just separating what has been separating Kyler is from hearing things out of fall camp that in some of the scrimmages and inter-squad scrimmages and things like that he's not turning the ball over really at the rate that Austin Kendall is. So I think that's going to bode well as he goes further into the season.
Yeah, when you're more talented and you don't turn the ball over as much, that makes the decision a little bit more easier to pull the trigger on. We got Jason Ray covering Oklahoma. You can go join him on Last Word on College Football. And we've got a number of contributors from there and guests through the years that have done an outstanding job, going back to Donald King, who no longer joins us because he's not on Last Word on College Football anymore. But Don's still a close friend who loves his Stanford Cardinal, and we still communicate. But Mike Laval, of course, with Tennessee and the SEC map, and Kevin McGuffey on Kentucky and elsewhere, and Tony Siracusa on UCLA and the Pac-12 and beyond. So it's a good crew there, Last Word on College Football. They have always been good to me, and now we've got Jason Ray on to talk OU Sooners. So, Jason, somebody asking William Lee actually on the live chat about the offensive line. You pretty much went through the offensive line, but if there's anything else you'd like to add about just the question marks up front, considering the big losses.
Yeah, sorry about that. So one of the things on the offensive line, I think what Coach Beanbo, the offensive line, Bill Beanbo, has done is he's looking at the right combination. I think in terms of left tackle, right tackle. I think Bobby Evans, who played right tackle last year, I think the prevailing idea kind of coming through the spring is that he was going to slide over to the left tackle position. And I think he's played with that a little bit. Some of the things that I've heard that Bobby Evans did move over to left tackle in the latest scrimmage. I think from also everything that I'm hearing from Creed Humphrey and Jonathan Alvarez looking to replace Eric Wren at the center position, it's kind of neck and neck at this point. I mean, Riley was, he was on the interview today. He talked a little bit about that. He still felt like that was a back and forth battle that no one really has the advantage. It's a very, very interesting battle. Creed Humphrey is a redshirt freshman out of here in Oklahoma, redshirted last year. Jonathan Alvarez is a fifth-year senior. So Alvarez probably has the advantage from an experience perspective, being through the battles, he's played a lot of ball at Oklahoma. He's had a lot of injuries in his career, but he has played a lot of ball at Oklahoma as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I would lean towards Creed Humphrey a little bit from that center position.
All right, Jason Ray, Last Word on College Football, talking Oklahoma football. Anything that you've released recently that we need to check out?
Yes, we had a couple of releases over the last couple of weeks. I released last week kind of talking a little bit about the fall camp battles, specifically the quarterback battle on the offensive side, the offensive line battle from a center position, and then defensively there's a few battles that are going on in terms of really kind of at the linebacker position. There's some stuff going on in the secondary in terms of the safeties and the cornerbacks. I mean, I think one interesting thing to note is the safeties. It's probably the biggest concern for Mike Stoops and defensive staff from a safety position, because they lost both starting safeties from a year ago, and replacing that from a secondary that was much maligned, particularly towards the last part of the year. So a lot of stuff where we kind of break down the what's happened from a fall camp perspective.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, bringing you previews and predictions. We have released almost the entirety of the Pac-12 North. Washington is coming tonight. And again, previews and predictions like you will find nowhere else as we get you set for 2018. We also bring the camp reports as well, courtesy guys like Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football with Oklahoma. So check out the schedule rankings and the previews and predictions, and also, of course, the camp reports that we've got in store. We've got Michigan in line for tomorrow night. Wanted to have David Waters from Gators Breakdown on tonight at 8:30. Unfortunately, David cannot make it, but we've got things lined up for Sunday. David Waters, Gators Breakdown, Sunday at 5 o'clock live stream right there. James Yoder from Chat Sports, Michigan football, roughly 10 o'clock tomorrow night. I've got an event to go to, but I'm going to be back roughly in the 10 o'clock hour to talk Michigan football on Thursday night. And, of course, tonight, actually, after we get off the line with Jason, I'm going to be doing the Dub V Nation podcast. So those fine folks are going to pepper me with questions about who knows what. All right. CeeDee Lamb, Marquise Hollywood Brown, that's being asked in the live chat by Ryan in regards to how do you evaluate those two guys? How do you compare them? Who's better?
Very, very interesting question. CD had a very, very good freshman year, especially the first half of the year. He tailed off a little bit towards the end. He did have an injury against Iowa State in the unfortunate loss early, kind of midway through the year. And Marquise Brown kind of picked it up towards the end of the year. He had a phenomenal game, over 200 yards against Oklahoma State in the Bedlam victory, and then played very well against TCU both games, particularly in the conference championship. They're both very dynamic in both different ways, right? CeeDee Lamb is probably more of your prototypical NFL receiver. He's tall. He's 6'1", 6'2". He's probably more in Riley's offense, more of a possession guy. He's not the long-term, the long-range threat that Marquise Brown is. Marquise, like you said, kind of exploded on the scene late in the year. Very, very little guy. I think one of the things that's been interesting is, Oklahoma released some of their fall weight in terms of, the height and weight. And one of the things that stood out from an offensive perspective was Marquise Brown and CeeDee Lamb for that matter. But I know Marquise Brown gained 10 pounds from the spring to the summer, and he's very diminutive receiver. So, he's certainly the long range, the deep threat, the threat that can take it to the house pretty much at any point. Whereas CD is more of the big body, go up and get the ball. He had a big catch in the second half against Georgia when the Sooners were struggling a little bit offensively in the third quarter and early in the fourth quarter, where kind of he won a jump ball. That turned the momentum a little bit back in Oklahoma's favor temporarily. So I think, from an equation to the NFL, I think CD is probably the guy that will equate to a more of an NFL type game. But another thing that was interesting, and one of the big things that's happened in the offseason, there was a couple of hires that Lincoln Riley made, but I think one of the biggest one is kind of going to be looks at this point to be kind of an unsung hire is from a strength and conditioning coach. They brought in Benny Wiley. Jerry Schmidt had been the strength and conditioning coach since Bob Stoops arrived in 1999 up until last year, and then he made the move. So Benny Wiley he worked with Riley while Riley was at Texas Tech, and he's been a big benefit. I think one of the things that CeeDee Lamb talked about a little bit in the spring was that he's always had trouble putting on weight. He's got a big frame, but he's just had problems putting on weight, and he gained about 20-25 pounds between the end of the year in terms of the Georgia game, but until spring ball, and it's been very evident out there on the field through the spring game, and also as it's translated through the summer and to the fall that you can see that he's put on those pounds. The one thing you worry about from a wide receiver position is do they lose any of their athleticism? Do they lose any of their speed? On that frame particularly someone that struggled with putting on weight, and now that they got that weight, how does that manifest itself in terms of speed and explosiveness and athleticism? But they're almost 1A 1B in terms of this year. They're very very different wide receivers, but I think Riley has worked them very well in terms of that, just being able to make plays on the outside in different ways.
Another question here, Jason, on the live chat concerns the defensive line, and not just an assessment of the personnel and the ability up front, but four-man defensive front going to be what's played most of the time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think they've morphed. Over the last few years, they've moved more to a 3-4, and it kind of sounds like through some of the things that you've seen, they're still going to have a lot of those 3-4 techniques and tendencies, but I think they're gonna move more to a hybrid, and I think one of those things that's going to require them to move to more of a hybrid is one of their big time recruits that they got here in the class, Brendan Radley Hiles, otherwise known as Buki. He was the prize recruit from the defensive perspective. So I think that moving to that 4-2-5 and playing predominantly a nickel package will allow him, to be on the field pretty much from day one. He's the guy that you look at, and he's got all the tools. He's got the comparisons to Tyrann Mathieu from LSU back from a few years ago, in terms of he's a little bit of a smaller guy. He's a ball hawk kind of. So I would look for him to – he's one of the reasons, like I said, that they're moving to that closer to that 4-2-5. And I think on the defensive line, specifically, seen a lot of good things out of Neville Gallimore through the fall. And he was a guy that was counted on very – very heavily last year, and he played a lot early and kind of tapered off. He had some injuries, and it's one of those things that it's really good to hear players when they almost call themselves out through the off season. He talked about maybe he didn't work as hard as maybe he should have. He said, and at a place like Oklahoma, if you get complacent, you get lackadaisical, you can lose your spot very quickly, even on the defensive line. But all things that I've heard from in terms of the middle, that he's had a few nicks and bruises through fall camp, but being steady there at the defensive line, the team is much better along that defensive line, and further to that, kind of going back to what we talked about in terms of Benny Wiley, one of the things that you've noticed is there's been a substantial weight gain. Hopefully that's good weight, right? But there has been substantial weight gain amongst the defensive line. I think one thing that Riley and the team noticed is, particularly in the second half, that Oklahoma got pushed around a little bit on the defensive side of the ball by Georgia. Georgia was a lot more physical, especially late. With Nick Chubb and company, they were Sony Michel. They were able to do kind of run at will, especially late. So they among the defensive line, their kind of average weight is sitting at around 305, 310 from what I saw earlier on the weight side of things. So I think getting bulk, and then also maybe moving more to that more of a traditional college 4-3 will hopefully help improve. I think they've improved the talent a little bit. I think the talent is one thing that Riley talked about towards the end of the year, then early in spring, was that there was a great need for talent upgrade. Some people looked at that as throwing his current players under the bus, and I think Mike Stoops caught a lot of heat last year for the way the defense had played, particularly over the last couple of years. But late in the season with some of the shootouts that they had to win against Oklahoma State, and then couldn't quite get it done against Georgia. But I think the talent is as good as it's been on the defensive side of the ball at all levels in quite a few years. So I would expect better play as long as they can stay healthy. They are a little thin on the defensive side of the ball. They've had quite a few injuries through fall camp. Most of those injuries have been to freshmen coming in that were expected to compete for a job. I think looking at it another way, it's at least it's not somebody that's been established in the program for a while and someone wasn't counted on to help right away. But that depth is maybe a little bit lacking, but I think the talent and the drive is better than what we've seen in the last few years.
Mark Rogers TV, voice of college football, coming your way with some Oklahoma talk on a Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Eastern time. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football, talking up the Sooners, Kyler Murray and company on offense. So basically, if you joined the live stream late, you missed a lot, so you know what to do. You wait until it posts, processes and posts, and it'll be ready to go. Just a few minutes after we're done here, you can go back and catch what you missed. Also, help out the channel by going into the links in the description section of any of the videos. You grab any of the links in the description section and do your Amazon shopping through one of those links. You can buy whatever you want. You don't have to buy one of those college football products. I just selected those because we tend to talk some college football here. So I selected those products, but you don't need to buy those. Just use the links. Also, our mailing list. This is huge. So I appreciate, in addition to people leaving me their email addresses to join the mailing list and the Mark Rogers TV Insiders Club. Haven't really sold myself on a name yet, but we'll go with that for right now. The Insiders, we're still working on that, Jason. So it's just been the mailing list, and that doesn't really doesn't seem too sexy, and it doesn't really appeal to too many. Just saying the mailing list, get on the mailing list, but. So we'll get that set in terms of a name, and maybe we'll be a little bit more unique than Insiders. That seems to be the typical claim of most of these outfits is you're going to be an insider. Well, you are going to be an insider. We'll get you a unique perspective that I have on every college football weekend, plus stats and trends. And I'm not going to tell you that you cannot find these stats or trends or facts anywhere, but I guarantee that you're not going to be able to find them collected in one place each and every week like you will here in our mailing list that starts week 1 of the college football season. And then, of course, an update on the channel. And you can, of course, give me your suggestions and comments and questions about where we're headed here at Mark Rogers TV. You're talking about talent and talking, Jason, about Oklahoma's lack of talent in spots on defense and that getting a little bit better. We know that Bob Stoops recruited well. There's no question about that. He couldn't win 85% of his games without recruiting well, but it was like he settled into that 10 or 15 range in the country and coached him up a little bit depending on the position, and Oklahoma was extremely successful. The last recruiting class that Bob Stoops had was incredible. I was very surprised that he moved on at the point that he did, not just the timing, but he looked like he was going to have the team that obviously Lincoln Riley had in almost winning a national championship. But he steps down after a good recruiting class, Lincoln Riley taking over and maintaining that at least. So you have to feel good about the recruiting prowess at this point.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that, it was interesting. I think, whatever you call it, if it's, kind of resting on your laurels or maybe not getting lazy is not the right word, but getting complacent a little bit. I think to your point, Bob Stoops had an outstanding recruiting class the last year that he was there. But I think a few years before that, they struggled a little bit. They were, in terms of specifically on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think they ever wavered on the offensive side, but I think the defense is where they struggled. And I think there's all kinds of reasons for that, right? I mean, I think a lot of times people think, the better defensive talent wants to go play in the SEC or wants to go play in the ACC with the Clemsons or the Virginia Techs or the Miamis or teams like that. But I think what's happened is Oklahoma's got a lot of over the last few years, a lot of 2- and 3-star guys on the defensive side of the ball, and now they're moving up to more of the 4-star guys over the last couple of years. I mean, Riley did a great job kind of rallying the troops last year, and in terms of him getting the head coaching job in the summer, just not too long before fall practice started, and then through 2019 he's hitting the ball out of the ballpark. I mean, they've got one of the top, whether you look at Rivals or 247, they've got somewhere in between the second or third and the fifth best recruiting class in the country. And while there's a lot of there's a lot of great recruits on the offensive side of the ball, there's the defense is certainly coming around as well. So there's a lot of 4-star guys that they've got both at the safety and the linebacker position, and then they're working on a few on the defensive line. I mean, one of the big recruits out of 2019 is Dax Hill. He is a 5-star recruit, the first 5-star recruit in the state of Oklahoma since the guy you guys might remember plays for Tampa Bay, Gerald McCoy, a few years back. So he's his brother is Justice Hill that actually played running back for Oklahoma State. So there's a little interstate battle there. He's really into. It seems like Oklahoma State is a little bit behind in terms of him. I think he's so good. He's the number 1 safety in the country, number 1 player in Oklahoma. And, it seems to be it's down to Oklahoma, Alabama, and Michigan at this point. It looked like for a while in the summer he was leaning more Oklahoma. Now it looks more like Michigan's kind of got more of the lead right now. But yeah, in terms of recruiting and building that talent back into the defensive side of the ball, it's been there. I think it's been building over the last couple of years. And one thing that Mike Stoops, it was really telling. One of the quotes that he had early in fall camp was that he felt like some of his players over the last couple of years were getting, more complacent. They were getting more complacent in terms of their work habits and how hard they were working, and how much they were putting in that effort, outside of game day through the week. And I think what he's seen, over this fall camp, more than he's seen in the last 3 or 4 years, is that, those young guys, those young, really talented guys that are ready to play immediately, ready to come in and support right off the bat. He's seeing a more spirited competition at all areas of the defense. So I think that that will breed more of a battle within the teams. The defensive side of the ball, and hopefully better production on the field.
We cover college football like no one else here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, as we bring on the best bloggers, broadcasters in the nation, and also analysis from myself. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football, talking of the Sooners. Can't ignore Oklahoma football. They reign there in the Big 12, and my selection of shirts, of course, bring some synergy to the discussion with Jason here. And also, Jason, so on the live chat, Kenneth Murray's name was brought up in regards to his leadership position as a sophomore, as determined by the team or Lincoln Riley, and just your thoughts about him as a player and taking a vocal position on that defense.
Yeah, I think it was very telling to see him as one of the individuals that Riley selected to come to the Big 12 Media Days. So, you have to feel for the guy. As specifically watching him in the Rose Bowl, he looked every part of a freshman. I think Georgia knew that. They took advantage of that. He was, there was a lot of times where he was very much out of position in that game. And then he, in fairness to him, due to injury, he wasn't ready to play. He wasn't ready to play as a freshman. He certainly wasn't ready to start as day one. And he was just forced into action. Sometimes that happens. You get injuries and things like that. But I think one of the things that he has owned is, to your point, and a more vocal leader. I certainly would expect him to be a captain this year, and that's difficult from a sophomore perspective. But he has been one of the everything you hear out of camp. He has been one of the vocal leaders. He has been, he has been a machine in terms of the film room. One thing that he mentioned, in the Big 12 Media Days, that he had rewatched the Rose Bowl tape, over 100 times, and as a Sooner fan, for years, it was I don't have the stomach to even go back and watch it once. So for him to be able to know how poorly he played in that game, and in the defense overall, I certainly expect him to make a jump. A lot of the things that he's done off the field, I think will show this year. But a lot of times it's you hear those things and you want to see it happen. You want to see it happen on the field. I know, this is going to be a kind of a stab to a lot of the Sooner fans' heart, but I think a lot of people thought Trevor Knight had turned the corner after his outstanding play against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, years back. But then coming back to that next year, he wasn't really. He didn't take the step that a lot of people thought he would take to be one of the next best quarterbacks at Oklahoma. So, I think it's a little bit of a wait and see feel with Kenneth Murray, but he does look the part. He does have the body. I think he has the skill. So it's one of those things that will be very interesting to see how he reacts to and what that improvement looks like from freshman to sophomore year.
All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, bringing you Oklahoma football talk on a Wednesday night. Got Michigan tomorrow night. We were supposed to have Florida tonight, but we got David Waters of Gators Breakdown moved to Sunday at 5 o'clock Eastern time. Getting some producing advice and help and direction from NCIS Fanatic 21 tonight. One of our good friends of the show has suggested that while I'm on the West Virginia podcast at 8 o'clock, why don't I just do a live stream and you guys can hear me talking West Virginia football, or I don't think they're going to ask me West Virginia football questions, actually, or it might be a short discussion. But we'll discuss college football as I believe they're going to want to hit me up with questions about Heisman candidates and conference races and top 25s and college football playoff races and so forth. Ryan on the line, Jason, is asking about an Oklahoma-Georgia Sugar Bowl. For as much as I hate bowl projections, a viewer made it known to me a few days ago that I should probably do bowl projections. I actually had a meeting with a digital guy at a major network about a couple weeks ago, and he noted that people love bowl projections. They're searching for bowl projections even before anybody plays a game, which seems ridiculous to me. But apparently one of the major services is projecting an Oklahoma-Georgia Sugar Bowl. So I don't expect any comment there, but if you have something for me, please jump in.
Yeah, I mean those things are fun, Mark. I mean, I think you see a lot. We actually dropped our Heisman projections for the year today, this morning at Last Word on College Football. So I think it's a lot of it's fun this time of the year, right? To talk about how players will play throughout the year, how teams will perform. It's certainly early. I mean, I think you obviously would expect Georgia to be back in the mix. Certainly be to be back in the mix in terms of the college football playoff. They have a certainly outstanding team. They did lose. They did lose a lot. Kind of on the offensive side of the ball, but they do certainly have a lot of returning, and they've had an outstanding recruiting class last year, and then up through 2019. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see both of those teams back in the playoff mix coming up this year.
All right, we were talking Oklahoma football with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football, and you can join him right there for your Sooner knowledge and insight right there. And we got a whole bunch of it here in the last 45 minutes with Jason, so we appreciate it. We're lacking sometimes in Oklahoma coverage, and we can't do that. They'll be a major player once again as a huge, monumental favorite to win the Big 12. You win your conference in the Power 5, and you most likely go to the college football playoff again. Jason, a couple things before we let you go. This Florida Atlantic game that I'm sure when it was scheduled was we got UCLA, that's our big game, non-conference, and then, you tack on your Tulsa and somebody else, and it turned out to be FAU, which wasn't given much thought at the time. But now with Lane Kiffin in play and them dominating Conference USA last year, they just obliterated the conference, won the league championship game by 45 points, and then they won their bowl game by, I think, 50-3 over Akron. So not comparing Akron and Oklahoma, but maybe a bit of a challenge that was unexpected because the depth, the talent overall is not really comparable, but maybe a bit of a scary opener.
It is a scary opener, Mark. I mean, I think Sooner fans are a little certainly a little nervous. I mean, more so on the defensive side of the ball than anything. Specifically, the way the way they played late last year. One of the unheralded running backs, one of the better running backs in the country that not a lot of people talk about, doesn't get a lot of national attention, is Devin Singletary from Florida Atlantic. Had over 1,900 yards rushing. I think he had something like almost 30 touchdowns on the ground last year. I know they're replacing someone at the quarterback position. Driscoll, I think he retired because of injury. So I don't know that it's settled who they're going to go with from the starting quarterback position at this point. There actually was Chris Robinson, who was a Oklahoma transfer. I think he's been since kicked off the team for rules violation. But yeah, Florida Atlantic was a great story last year, right? I mean, love him or hate him, Kiffin did a really good job with that team last year. Certainly they don't play the kind of the level of competition in terms of seeing the same scale, the same athletes that Oklahoma is going to trot out there. But I think it's very nerve wracking, specifically from obviously from a defensive side of the ball, but coming with a new quarterback, whoever it is, if it's Kyler or if it's Austin Kendall, breaking in a new quarterback, all the nuances that you would expect from an opener. It's something like, as you mentioned, Mark, a few years ago, it was just kind of a not really thought of as a really tough opener. But now it's certainly not Ohio State, which they had last year, but it's a good solid team. It's certainly not UTEP on the other side of the coin. So wouldn't be surprised to see the scoreboard light up early and often. Especially as you kind of get into your game plan and get into the feel for the other team. Definitely wouldn't be surprised to see both teams in the 30s specifically. Maybe even see a 40-30 type of ball game.
According to FAUOwlaccess.com, this is my first visit to their particular site. We've got two primary contenders for the starting job. This was just posted a few weeks ago. DeAndre Johnson and Chris Robinson, as you mentioned, lacking experience, both of them. Plenty of talent, as mentioned here. Okay, Johnson began his career at Florida State before transferring to FAU with a stop at East Mississippi Community College in between. I'm familiar with that stop there in regards to when I used to cover football down in the SEC. He battled for the starting spot last season and even played a couple of downs in the season opener against Navy. He had season-ending surgery to remove blood clots from his arm, unfortunately, but he seems to be healthy now. Then you got Robinson, a redshirt freshman enrolled at Oklahoma, as you mentioned, as a high-profile recruit. Sooners dismissed him after an arrest for a public intoxication, prompting an immediate transfer to FAU. Okay, there you go. The both quarterbacks, in play, trying to adapt to the Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weiss offense. So playmakers, apparently some guys that have strong arms and a little bit of speed back there to deal with, but a lot of inexperience, as does Kyler Murray, although he played some at Texas A&M. Yeah. All right, Chris Ray on the line. You got to catch him on Last Word on College Football and his coverage specifically of Oklahoma football. We're here at Last Word on College Football, and here at Mark Rogers TV, of course, the voice of college football, with team reports all over the place. And you got to catch our previews and predictions. We will tell you where each team will finish in the Power 5, plus our college football playoff predictions. So we're making our way right now through the Pac-12. We've released Stanford late last night, Washington, and others coming tonight. And NCI's Fanatic 21 has prompted me to strike up a live chat in just a few minutes while I'm on the phone. This is going to be just sterling, what we would call television video of me on the phone with the West Virginia podcasting people. But why not? Somebody's going to watch. Right, Jason?
That's right. Everybody's
going to. Okay. All right, Jason, we appreciate you stopping by. Love the insight on Oklahoma football, and I love to have you guys on that really know your teams, because I learn a whole bunch. And we're just a few weeks away. It's the longest off season in sports. And for as much as I love to talk about college football, I'd rather watch it. Yep. And then we can talk about something fresh that we just saw, rather than the last 9 months of just drudging up what happened last December and January, or trying to project what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're about to get cranked up a couple of weeks away. So, Mark, I certainly appreciate you having me on. I'm happy to be here.
All right, Jason, you take care. I will
All right.
remind everyone that we are going to go live at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And whatever that turns out to be, I will just continue to talk about college football. And then at one point, I will be on the line with the Dub V Nation. That's the West Virginia WVU Dub V Nation podcast, talking to them and whatever they throw out. And I'll try to get their audio on the line as well as mine at the same time, so you can hear the conversation as I'm interviewed for their West Virginia podcast and talking Big 12 football and beyond, I'm sure. All right, we will catch everyone in just about, 5 or 6 minutes, as we will strike up another live stream right here. You know what? Let's just stay on the line. I'll stay on the line. Jason, we appreciate you stopping by. You can just click out whenever you'd like. It's up to you.
Okay,
or hang out otherwise. And Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, continuing our live stream on a Wednesday night. I've got nobody else booked for tonight. Gators Breakdowns, David Waters, scheduled for tonight. We moved him to Sunday. He had something going on there, and so we're good to go. But Gators Breakdown with David Waters, you got to join him. I love the breakdown on Florida football. They do it in a very analytical but fun way. A lot of banter, a lot of great debate, and so join David Waters, Gators Breakdown. David and I ventured into the SEC with SEC Breakdown a few years ago. I don't know if any of you were around at the time, but we had a big SEC venture and tried to build out a channel, but some things went awry, and so that kind of broke down. But David Waters doing a great job with Florida football and Gators Breakdown. All right, I'm going to hang on the line. At 8 o'clock, I've been given my instructions to call into the Dub V Nation podcast, and I will do that again at 8 o'clock. I don't believe we can catch it live anywhere else. I think they are recording this for their podcast to be released later. And I'm anticipating questions about the college football playoff and who's going to win different divisions and conferences, and who are the favorites versus who's going to possibly take a tumble that's supposed to win, and who's going to be a dark horse that's going to rise up and win. Those kind of typical questions, and it should be a fun time. So this is Shyler Callahan, who I had on this past Sunday to talk West Virginia football, and that was a fun conversation. All right, guys, I know this is difficult to do, and I know that I would not be inclined to do this either, even if I really liked watching somebody on YouTube. And I've never really watched or locked into any particular YouTuber. But, it helps us when you grab one of those Amazon links and do your shopping on Amazon. So I might be talking to people that never touch Amazon, like myself. Not that I never have, but I've shopped on Amazon a handful of times. It's not like I'm on there every other day. But if you shop on Amazon, just use one of the links. And again, you don't need to buy the products, just use the links, and that helps us out here at Mark Rogers TV. We are going to have a Patreon page here very soon. So I'll give a slice of update of what I would tell the insiders. And William Lee has told me, do not in any way use that term. No. And William, I won't. I can almost guarantee I won't. I guess if I don't come up with anything better, and maybe that's a great question for you guys. Come up with a great name for this mailing list, besides just me calling it a mailing list, or calling it the Mark Rogers TV's Insider Club or Insiders. That's used by everybody else in the world. So if you come up with something better for us to name it, and I'm sure I'm going to get some comical, very amusing responses to that, but I will probably get some decent responses to that as well. And I'll laugh at the amusing ones, and I'll consider the interesting ones, and we can go forward with that. But this is the type of thing, in addition to the college football take and perspective and trends and stats and info, that I'll provide is an update on the channel. So right now I am efforting to put together a Patreon page, which is not difficult. You can just sign up for an account. So I have the page itself, I just don't really have anything on there that anybody would want to look at. So I would like to produce a professional looking video. So I have hired an editor from a major sports network television place to do my video editing for me on this video. And then I am looking for a place to shoot the video to where I present myself on Patreon and hopefully garner some support on Patreon. If you don't know what Patreon is, go to patreon.com and you'll see soon. Basically, it's a place for musicians and podcasters and creators of all sorts who want to benefit from their audience's loyalty. And the audience doesn't have to give up a fortune to pay for the content. Of course, the content's free, but are just appreciative of the content and say, hey, I'll throw you $1 a month or $3 a month. And it goes into the pot and it helps push the content and provides me more time and more bells and whistles at some point. So I think I've helped with the background. The next thing I'd like to do, similar to many podcasters and YouTubers that you see, is, and this is more difficult to do live than it is to do in post-production. So if I did nothing but videos that were recorded and then downloaded, then I would put on some graphics and make them look nice. I can put pictures on. If you've ever seen videos that I've done, like the schedule rankings or the videos that I've done with the previews and predictions, I put the graphics on. But even more so, if I have some of my guests on and they can't connect via video and they call in, then I will cover up the shot with different pictures and slides and could do moving video. So I could do all that editing if everything was recorded. But I love the live streams, and the live streams, I believe, are going to fuel this channel, is going to be my connection with you and your connection with me and our engagement on the live chat and also with the calls coming in. So it's much more complex to be able to put on the graphics and the music and everything live. And so I'm going to have to get the software, learn the software. So this is going to be a slow climb, especially since we're going into college football season right now. So we probably won't see that until next off season. I wanted to do it this off season, but didn't happen. So again, Patreon is coming soon here to Mark Rogers TV, and your opportunity to help me out and help the channel and help fund us for an amount of money that you could probably lose each month, you know, $1. So let's see. We'll stay on the line here. It is 8 o'clock. So I guess I'm invited to call the W Nation podcast. So I'll stay on here and do just that. And we'll see what they ask me. So again, this is Shyler Callahan of W Nation. And I'm going to call the line right now. Meanwhile, I'm going to talk college football with you guys and see what you have on the live chat. And hopefully all this works out so they can hear me.
Hello?
Yes. Hey, this is Mark.
Hey, Mark. It's Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I've got you on speaker. Does that work? Is that okay? Do you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you good.
Okay.
I kind of cut out for a second, but then now I hear you.
Excellent.
When I introduce you, what should I say who you're with?
Mark Rogers TV.
Mark Rogers TV? All right.
Yes, sir.
Sounds good. Perfect. And Skylar, I think Skylar told you thoughts on WVU, your playoff team, your sleeper team, and your top 10. Who's not going to be in your top 10?
Yeah, we can do all that. Certainly, we can do all that. So you're telling me who's not going to be in my top 10?
Yeah, well, who's been in the top 10 across, the different, Athlon Sports and Sports Illustrated.
Okay.
Who's in the top 10 now that you think that's going to disappoint?
Sure.
Top 25. The first question will be, though, your thoughts on the Big 12, where they fit amongst the other Power 5 conferences.
Okay, very good.
That's kind of how we're starting off.
Excellent.
We'll just kind of go off what we're going to ask you, and then we'll see how long it takes. Probably won't take more than 10, 15 minutes, I would assume.
All right, that sounds good, sir.
We're not on a time limit at all or anything, but I don't imagine it's taking too long, but you never know. Sometimes you get into discussion and it kind of goes. So.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, no problem. Skylar's actually on hold. I'll get him on here real quick.
Excellent. Navy Thomas, Patreon. Patreon, it's a good thing. I'm not begging, but this is the only way to fund the channel. And if I can't fund the channel, then there's not going to be a channel. So.
Skylar, you there?
Yeah. How's it going, Mark?
Hey, Skylar. I'm doing just fine. How are you?
Good, good. Glad we got you on our show this time.
Absolutely.
John, I forgot to hit record. See if everything's working. You mind saying something, Mark?
Test 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. That's how we do it in the big time. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
That works. Skylar?
Testing 1, 2.
All right, perfect.
Good to go?
Yep.
Okay.
Get that for it. And you just want to be Mark Rogers from MarkRogersTV, and then at the end, I'll have you promote every outlet.
Excellent. You can throw in the voice of college football.
I'll let you do all. All
right.
Introduce you as the voice of college football, Mark Rogers from MarkRogersTV. How's that sound?
Whatever you want to do there. I've got as many nicknames as Muhammad Ali, so you don't need to try to remember all of them.
But at the end, I'll just say, just tell them where to find you, and then you can promote whatever you want to promote.
Excellent. Thank you.
No problem. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we welcome in Mark Rogers, the voice of college football from MarkRogersTV. Mark, how you doing?
Doing great tonight. How are you guys?
Doing well. Excited about football. I don't know about you, but I'm pumped. Practice is starting. We're starting to get a lot more articles out there. How excited are you for this season?
Absolutely. So I tell people this all the time. If you root for the NBA, let's say you're an NBA fan, well, you like blink and turn around and the next season starts. They're already in the summer camp and preseason and they already get going. So us as college football fans have to wait the longest, more than any other major sport. It seems like it's been forever since we watched a college football game. So I can't wait to stop talking about what happened last year and what we think is going to happen this year and actually watch games and then talk about fresh activity on the field.
Yes, that's some of the fun parts of the preseason. Big 12, obviously West Virginia's in the Big 12. May not get a lot of national respect as far as media. Where do you kind of see the Big 12 amongst the other Power 5 conferences?
Guys, I was really hard on the Big 12 a few years ago. I just didn't think that based on the level of defensive play, the lack of talent in the conference that could be directed toward the recruiting rankings and the 3 and 4 and 5 stars that were coming into the league compared to the other Power 4 leagues, the other 4. And then we could see it on the other end of the collegiate player's career, where we saw the NFL draft was showing us that the Big 12 wasn't anywhere close to, especially the Big 10, the SEC, and to a lesser extent the ACC, but really not with the other 4 leagues at that point. And I'm talking 2013, 2014, 15, in that range. And then on the field, we would see in Oklahoma go up against a Clemson in the college football playoff. And I try not to make too much out of one game because I don't think you can do that. But we saw repeatedly, and I think it culminated with that 2016 season, early in the season, when Oklahoma then went out after the Houston and Ohio State games and obliterated the conference, proved to be the best team in the conference by far, went undefeated, but they lost to Ohio State at home by 3 scores. They lost to Houston, a group of 5 team, a very good one, but a group of 5. And I thought at that point, wow, this is the low point for the Big 12. And is it going to get any lower? Well, the Big 12 rallied that postseason, didn't play great, didn't blow anyone away, but they held their own in the games that you would have expected them. I know that Baylor, for example, won a big bowl game against Boise State after losing 6 consecutive in the Big 12. They were able to go on a national stage against Boise State, who was well respected, and just run right through them. Oklahoma won a game in the Sugar Bowl against Auburn, and they had a number of really good moments. And then the next season, of course, Baylor had a nice showing, or the previous season against North Carolina in a bowl game in which they ripped them up. So the Big 12 has really rebounded. In terms of trying to rank these conferences, this is more difficult right now, guys, I think, than it's ever been. The SEC from about the early 2000s, and then certainly around 06, 07, established itself as the best. Now, I never thought it was as good or dominant as most of the national media group think, because, again, there's too much emphasis placed on just the championship game. But I did think it was significantly the best conference, and there was no argument. And anyone who would argue that between about 2006 and 14 just doesn't have a clue. But now it's regressed. And the lack of quarterback play, really good coaches leaving the league, has opened the door for some other leagues. And I think the talent is still best in the SEC, but not necessarily the play. So I think I would still go SEC at the top, but I think it's really a dogfight. And the Big 12 really acquitted itself well most of last season. But I've got to put it in that 4 slot above the Pac-12, but certainly rivaling close to ACC play is where I'd put it right now.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. I mean, that's about where I have the Big 12 at, and I think everybody in the right mind, if you watch college football, you look at, the Pac-12 is probably at the bottom right now. It's pretty much Washington and everybody else. The Big 12, like you said, they're starting to rebound a little bit. But the last time West Virginia won 10 games was 2 years ago, 2016. The league as a whole was kind of widely known for being in a quote-unquote down year. Now West Virginia is starting to garner interest and more attention this season, and a lot of people look around the league. Baker Mayfield's gone, Mason Rudolph's gone, Kenny Hill's gone. A lot of people think the Big 12 is going to take another step back this year. So my question is, Mark, 1, can West Virginia live up to the hype that they're getting? And 2, does the Big 12 necessarily have to be in a, quote, down year for West Virginia to be at the top of the league?
So I think typically when people start making predictions in the offseason, everybody's looking for that team or group of teams that we don't all want to bring our predictions to the table. And I'm working on mine right now and say, okay, Ohio State's going to win the Big Ten, and Alabama's going to win the SEC, and Clemson's going to win the ACC, and Oklahoma and Washington, and there you go, and pick 4, and there's your college football playoff. We're always looking for, Auburn went from 0-8 in 2012 to the BCS championship game. Michigan State went from 3-9 to 9-3 this past season. We want to be a visionary to see who's going to be that team or teams that can break the mold and break through. And where's that going to be? Well, West Virginia, because of a few things here. Baker Mayfield leaving, Mason Rudolph leaving, number of quarterbacks in the Big 12 gone from their programs, and uncertainty at the quarterback position across the top half of the league. Kenny Hill moving on to TCU. Combined with Will Grier. Just look at the play on the field from the West Virginia offense when he was in the lineup versus scoring 15, 18 points against Texas and Utah and the other game he missed late in the season. The guy's a stud. He's a gunslinger. He's great. And everybody's looking for that team. So I've seen kind of 2 sets of prediction types during the offseason. One, that we're on the West Virginia bandwagon, man. This team's going to be fun. They're going to score a ton. The defense is going to be just good enough. And the rest of the league is regressed, and Texas isn't ready offensively, and they lost their best defensive players from last year. So this is West Virginia's window. They'll take advantage. Versus when you add up the metrics, when I look at the real grinded out metric based predictors like Bill Conley on SB Nation, they're not as high on West Virginia because the metrics don't really speak to it. I just think, and we talked about this on Sunday, Schuyler, in regards to that West Virginia schedule, and there are all sorts of teams every year that make it through a meat grinder because they're just that good. but I have to question whether West Virginia is going to be that good to make it through those final 5 games of the season that are just so difficult. And then if you're thinking college football playoff, they also have to make it through 2 difficult group of 5 or non-conference games in the Power 5. And I know people snicker at Tennessee. They just went 0-8, but they've recruited top 15 to 20 talent. So that's what is on the roster. They don't have it pulled together and ready to go necessarily. So West Virginia should win that game and win it by 20 points, but you never know. And then the trip to NC State's going to be tricky. So within the Big 12, and that's what we're talking here, I think they have a legitimate shot, but I would not put my money on West Virginia. I slated them for 6-3 in the conference and 9-3 overall, with, again, me thinking, okay, I think they're going to slip by NC State, and I think the Tennessee game is going to be competitive and fun to watch for about 2.5 to 3 quarters, and then they'll take over and score a few easy touchdowns late and win that, 45-28 or whatever like that. So West Virginia, I think, is going to be fun to watch, and they're going to be in it in November, but I don't see them completing the deal.
Yeah, I mean, Chris and I, we're pretty much on the same page. We did pretty much our season prediction on the team. Neither one of us have them winning the Big 12. So I guess kind of reiterating that point, I mean, does it have to be a down year for the Big 12 for West Virginia to be the top dog? I mean, can there ever be, will it always be considered a down year if West Virginia is the 1 or 2 guy?
My short answer would be yes, because Texas is going to be Texas, and at some point they're going to develop these guys, because I saw some statistics just recently on Twitter from Pick 6, and I thought it was just astounding. It wasn't surprising, but it was astounding, the level that Texas has recruited, even during this downtime of churning out these 5-7, 6-6 teams over the past 5 to 7 years. Their recruiting has not really dropped off. I don't know what they're doing with these guys, but they can't coach them because they're not winning games, but their talent's been elite, near elite, not quite at the Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama level, but it's been really good. And now Tom Herman brings in the class that he just did last year. So Texas and, of course, Oklahoma's got it rolling. They are just going to be so good and so loaded and have such advantage that I do think you're going to have to catch them in a down cycle. Now, the positive is that really they're the only 2 that I think consistently will be 10-win type programs going forward.
You kind of touched on some of it. You look around college football, it seems like you have the top teams every year. You have the same playoff teams. Who do you have right now going into the season? I know you haven't done your predictions yet, but who are you kind of looking at for your top 4 teams by the end of the year?
Well, I think that what I'm wrestling with is another situation with the SEC winning out and getting 2 teams in, because the Georgia schedule is soft. It is the worst schedule in the SEC. They typically schedule somebody else besides Georgia Tech in the non-conference. They didn't do that this year, i.e. Notre Dame last year, and like they have coming up with more Notre Dame and UCLA. So Georgia has a light touch, even though they lost a ton on defense and lost the 2 backs in the backfield that we all know. They are the dominant favorite right now in the SEC Eastern Division. So they could arrive at the SEC championship game with 0 or 1 loss. And Alabama has such a light schedule. It's almost an embarrassment. They may not play a ranked team, and probably won't until mid-November. They just have nobody on their schedule early, and it's basically an Auburn, Mississippi State schedule, unless LSU shows us that the Joe Burrow's ready to go and they're going to be better than we expect. And those 2 games are the 2 challenges on Alabama's schedule this past season. They lost against Auburn in the Iron Bowl on the road, and they almost lost at Mississippi State, pulled that out in the last 2 minutes in Starkville. So you know what that means. They've got both those games at home this year. So Alabama plays Tennessee and Kentucky or Missouri. Tennessee and Missouri in the Eastern Division, so they avoid Florida, South Carolina, Georgia. And wow, we could have another situation where it's like, oh wow, the SEC championship game loser is going to lose by 3 points and get into the college football playoff. The ACC, again, this is the only thing that's bothering me right now about lining up for the college football season is it seems so freaking predictable. So I'm hoping it's not. Clemson, Miami seem destined for the ACC championship, and it seems as though Clemson's just a clear one, and Miami not necessarily a clear two, but because of the division structure, should make it to the title game. And we all saw what happened last year. And yeah, I don't think it's going to be 38-3 this time around, but give Clemson a slot. They are the team that I think is the surest lock to get to the playoff would be Clemson because of their talent, their coach, and most of all, the conference setup. Not necessarily that it's weak. It's just set up right for them. And Florida State's not going to be quite ready, but they're intriguing. Florida State's going to be really intriguing. Now, the Big Ten, Ohio State's as loaded as anybody, but man, we know what's going on with Urban Meyer right now, and who knows what effect that's going to have, whether he's gone. I don't believe he's going to lose his job, but the effect of the situation, I don't think that it's going to affect the team that much, and they've got 3 weeks to recover and get ready for TCU out of the gate in week 3, which, of course, is going to be a highlighted game for both conferences. But Penn State, Michigan State has 20 returning starters from a really good 10-3 team. And Michigan might be the most intriguing team in the Big Ten because everybody's waiting for that Harbaugh season to break through and for him to do what he did at Stanford and with the 49ers, and that's win a championship, at least in a league. And he's got Shea Patterson, a quarterback, who only has a 10 or 11 game career, but he's looked like Russell Wilson when he's played. And he's done it against some pretty good SEC defenses. So that's what Michigan has lacked on offense is a dynamic quarterback. And they've got that now to go with that defense and 2 really good running backs. So, man, Michigan, they intrigue me like almost no one else in the country. When we look at the Big 12, I think we've rounded that out in regards to who should be the players in the mix. And possibly you throw in TCU and Sean Robinson, I believe, should be a capable quarterback. And out in the Pac-12, Washington is, of course, the clear-cut favorite. I'm looking at USC and thinking, is USC going to do this year what they did 2 years ago? When they came out of the gate 1-3, they selected Max Brown instead of Sam Darnold as their starting quarterback. Darnold gets into the lineup. They get blasted before that by Alabama and Stanford. And then they click because they selected the right guy. They got him in play. The roster matured. They had Deontay Burnett and Ronald Jones. A lot of guys come of age, and they were a top 5 type caliber team at the end of the season. Nobody wanted to play them, but it wasn't enough to get to a college football playoff because they lost too many games. Now they've got road dates at Stanford and Texas in the first month. I think that's going to put USC in a difficult position, but they may be as good as anybody at the end in the Pac-12. And so my intriguing teams in the Pac-12, though, are Utah and Oregon. Oregon plays nobody out of conference. I mean, nobody. It's a joke. So they're going to be 3-0 outside the conference. They've got Stanford and Washington both at home. They have an NFL quarterback who's going to be selected in the top 10 to 15 picks in the draft next year, Justin Herbert, who a lot of us haven't seen play a whole lot of football because he hasn't played a whole lot. He started 7 games last year. They went 6-1 in the regular season when he was on the field. In looking at his game logs and some of his tape the other night and preparing for that video release, I'm intrigued to see him play the Stanford and Washington defenses, though, because he lined up against all the bad defenses in the Pac-12. But he lit it up. Jim Leavitt as defensive coordinator for Oregon is a monster. He's a great defensive coordinator. The 1 year that Colorado broke free and completely was the aberration in college football 2 years ago and made it to the conference championship game, he was their defensive coordinator. He goes to Oregon. They went from number 119 in the advanced metrics defensively to 61. They improved by 58 spots. And they've got like 5 or 6 like freak players on defense, but they're really thin. So if they stay healthy on defense and Herbert's slinging the ball, that could be a dark horse. And in the other division, my dark horse is Utah. Quarterback, running back, wide receivers all back, offensive line mostly back. defense shouldn't be up to quite to Utah's best defenses that we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, but they'll be fine. The only difficulty for Utah is they play the toughest conference schedule of anyone in the Pac-12. So that has kind of compromised my selection of them, and I'm thinking that one over before I pull the trigger. But I really like Utah to possibly inch by USC. They've got USC at home. Maybe they get to the Pac-12 championship game. I don't think they're going to win enough games to get to a playoff, but maybe the Pac-12 is back in a situation where they've got a couple of 10-2 or 9-3 teams in the championship game, and they get left out again. Especially if Washington can't beat Auburn in week 1, that really is going to carry the conference. If they can look to that game and then Washington can go, let's say, 8-1 in the Pac-12 after they beat Auburn, then they're in great shape. But otherwise, if they lose to Auburn, then that puts the conference in a bad spot in regards to trying to make a case for the playoff.
Now, one thing you highlighted, and again, this is another area that Chris and I have touched on and talked about on the show and even off the show a lot, is the really weak scheduling by the SEC in particular. We're going to kind of stray away from the college football playoff stuff for just 1 second. So before we get back to that, what are your thoughts on the SEC and their kind of cupcakey schedule? The fact that they're playing, teams like the Citadel or Georgia Southern or, Georgia State, the likes of those guys as late as they are in the season. Now, in my opinion, I feel like college football needs to do something about this. Something about it, step in, because they're basically what they're doing is they're buying a win late in the year, where you're having teams like West Virginia go to on the road to Oklahoma State, and in the same week, Alabama is playing a team like the Citadel or whoever they're playing that week before they play Auburn. So, to me, it just kind of seems like an unfair advantage when, say, a team like Alabama and maybe not West Virginia, but say Oklahoma are both fighting for that number 4 spot in the playoff, and one's got to go on the road to a Big 12 or a league opponent while one's getting a cupcake win at home. I think at some point the NCAA has got to step in and say, you cannot play, these types of teams past week 4, week 5 of the season. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I don't disagree with you entirely, Schuyler, but I'm trying to just clarify your point. So you don't have an issue with those same teams being played by, let's say, in Alabama, just structured differently, so that game's played in September because you think there's some kind of an advantage of playing a Citadel or Mercer the second to last week of the season because that keeps them better rested?
I think basically, yes. So basically what I see from it is if you're going to play somebody like that, I think do it in the first 3-4 games of the year. Do it, if you're going to do it, because mostly everybody in the country is doing at least one of these games a year. And to me, if you're doing it earlier in the year, you can get your players some playing time, early playing time and everything. But I don't understand why all these teams are scheduling these guys in November when you're supposed to be playing league opponents. And to me, you're basically getting a free bye week or a rest week before you play your rival like Auburn, or you're getting basically a free win late. So if you're 9-1 heading into that week, sure as hell you ain't going to be 9-2 heading into that Auburn game. You're not going to have that late loss that the playoff committee looks at and say, oh, well, if you have a late loss, we're gonna take you. We're gonna put it against you. Whereas if it happens early in the year, they seem to be a little bit lenient on that.
So what I think you're also railing against is not necessarily just the non-conference scheduling, but the 8-game conference season versus the 9.
Yes.
Because that's part of it too.
I firmly believe if you have the chance to play non-conference games, everybody should do it. And obviously every team has at least 10 or more teams in it, so I think they should. Dana Holgerson said this before. The Big 12 is the only conference that plays a round-robin schedule, and they're going to be the only ones that can do that. But I think every team should adopt the nine conference game schedule. I think the Big 10 just did it not too long ago, if I'm correct.
Yes.
I think other teams or other conferences need to start doing the same.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think we have too many people running around, too many schools and programs and conferences doing their own thing, and there's not enough uniformity. If any sport needs uniformity, it's college football, because they don't get to play enough games for us to properly compare the teams or have them play each other. So we need at least as much uniformity as we can, so we can give this college football playoff selection committee at least an even playing field to judge them by. And you make a great point with that, and I've always agreed as well. So this is maybe the time to pitch my scheduling system. So I will leave alone conference scheduling, because that's a whole other conversation that I won't introduce here. But conference scheduling can be fixed as well. I'll just give one example. About 5 years ago, when Alabama and LSU were the best teams in the SEC Western Division, and it shouldn't even matter how good they are, but I think that emphasizes the point. Everybody in this division plays each other, so that's 5 games, and then you play each other, so that's 6 that are exactly the same. So the only difference in the scheduling in the SEC, for example, are the 2 games that you play against the teams in the other division. Well, the 2 teams that Alabama played in that particular year were Kentucky and Vanderbilt, and they went 2-14 in conference play the year before. LSU had to play Georgia and Florida, who went 14-2 the year before in conference play. So basically, you're saying you 2 teams are competing for a championship, and 6 of your games are exactly the same. And so there's only 2 differences, and you get to play 2 teams that went 14-2. You play 2 teams that went 2-14, and this is fair. So that's I have a whole formula that would even that out and still maintain the rivalries in the conference. But we'll talk about non-conference scheduling. This is what I would do. Whether you go to 8 games or 9 games, and I would be a 9-game guy for conference play, because I just think for the ACC and the SEC to play 8 games and miss 5 opponents, meaning there's a team in your conference. Well, there's actually 6 teams in your conference that you only play once every 6 years, and you're supposed to be in the same conference. You play them once every 6 years. So I think it's ridiculous. So it's bad enough with 9 games and 14 teams in the league, but you at least reduce that situation where you miss 5 teams in your conference. So the other 3 games are non-conference games. I would tell everybody in college football that we now are taking scheduling out of their hands. The individual programs can no longer run around and just schedule whoever they want. We're taking it out of their hands. We're going to give them 1 game, and they can go schedule an FCS or a group of 5 or do whatever they want with that 1 game. But with the other 2 games, our committee is going to schedule it. And basically, our goal is to give everyone a 500 composite opponents schedule. So in those 2 games, so let's take West Virginia, for example. This year, you're playing Tennessee and NC State. And off the top of my head, Tennessee went 0-8 in the SEC last year, and NC State went, I think, 6-2 in the ACC. Well, we may keep the NC State game for you, and we're going to go find a team that went 2-6 in conference play last year. And so we're going to give you a 500 composite opponents schedule in Power 5 play for you to play. And Oklahoma is going to have the same. Like if we have them a 5-3 opponent, we're going to go get them a 3-5 opponent. So the games, you can't predict how good teams are going to be the next year. So it's not foolproof, but at least you're attempting to give schedule equity to everyone. So that would be my plan. And I've worked it out, and it works. So it can be done.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that'd be a pretty interesting format. I just think that you've got to find a way somehow to eliminate these teams from scheduling, like the G5 opponents, or the FCS opponents that late in the season. Because like I said, to me, it's not fair. I mean, West Virginia hasn't been in the playoff contention yet, but if you're in Oklahoma or you're, let's see, a Washington, you're playing a conference opponent in week, or game 11, where the SEC teams are playing that smaller rated team. I mean, it's almost unfair because one has a risk of losing, one doesn't that late in the year.
Okay, so Skylar, so if I follow this, and you made your key point right at the end, so you think the late loss affects the college football playoff selection committee more than an early loss, because if that's not the case, then it doesn't matter when they play.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does.
It's not supposed to.
It's not supposed to, but I think it does, depending on what team it is. So, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Michigan States, the teams with the bigger brands, they can absorb a loss late in the year, where a team like, say, West Virginia, for instance, goes 10-1 their first 11 games. They lose to Oklahoma let's say 11-0. I'm sorry, 11-0 into that Oklahoma game. They lose to Oklahoma. Now they're 11-1. That late season loss is going to affect them majorly compared to other teams around the country.
So the argument that I'll make is not really an argument. I think it's up in the air. Is we haven't seen one of those programs make it to the college football playoff. We have seen nothing but either blue bloods or like an Oregon, who was for a short period of time an elite program, make the play. Those are the only teams that have made the playoffs. So I'm not disagreeing with you, because the bias cannot be ignored, and there has to be some level of bias. There definitely is. And maybe it's against a West Virginia or an NC State or a Iowa or somebody that's not supposed to be there. And if they lose in week 11 or week 12, well, even though the metrics are supposed to, and it's supposed to be all about resume and track record, and that loss is supposed to be weighted the same, I can completely agree with your point theoretically, but we haven't seen it play out. So I would like to see it play out, because we know that Alabama absorbed a late loss last year. Mm-hmm. We know that Georgia absorbed a late loss against Auburn last year. And I'm sure it's happened a few other times during the college football playoff run that we've seen over the past 4 years. But it's a good point. The one place where I don't think there's an advantage is because all the teams in the SEC that play that scrimmage the week before their rivalry game, their opponent also plays a scrimmage. So Alabama and Auburn are both playing nobody the week before the Iron Bowl. Mm-hmm. So there's no advantage in the game, but I totally get your point that there could be an advantage of no risk loss. There's no risk of losing a game there, while everybody else is going through the meat grinder in their conference in week 11.
Let me ask you this, Mark. I know a lot would happen. There's a ton of different scenarios that can go through here. But say a West Virginia team's 11-2, Big 12 champs. You look at the schedule. We don't know what Tennessee. I mean, you kind of said they have a top 15, top 20 recruiting class. They may not be as good at the beginning of the year, but they may get better at the end of the year. So they may be a 7-win team by when it's all said and done. And it could also be a 3-win team. We don't know.
Sure.
But if they go 11-2 Big 12 champs, would you be pushing them to make that Final Four because of the strength of their schedule?
So I'm big into the conference championships. And the reason I am is, and I had to try to sell this for show after show after show after show and explain it to person after person after person. So we had a situation last year. Ohio State won the Big Ten. Alabama only had one loss, and they did not win the SEC championship game. Same thing happened the season before, to a certain extent, with Penn State winning the Big Ten and Ohio State got in. I'm big into the conference championship. Otherwise, I don't know why we're playing conferences. And also, the conferences are playing within silos. There is only like a handful of games between conferences that really matter, that tell us anything, that give us indication. So especially if West Virginia went 11-2 and they lost both of those games in the Big 12 and won the non-conference games, regardless of how marginal NC State and Tennessee turn out to be, of course, it's going to help the resume if they surprise and are much better than we expect. But I can't answer that question without knowing what else is happening across the country. I can only tell you that I explained to a ton of people last year that I would have selected Ohio State over Alabama. That doesn't mean, and certain portions of my audience didn't seem to understand this, regardless of me not stuttering when I said it. That didn't mean that I thought Ohio State was better than Alabama. That meant that I thought they earned the spot over Alabama because they won a conference championship. Same thing the year before, Penn State winning the Big Ten. I would have selected them over Ohio State because they were Big Ten champion. Yes, I'm a big believer in you select 4 conference champions. And unfortunately, because we've got a stupid system that leaves out a conference champion at least, and some years 2. The last 2 years, we left out 2 champions. It can't be perfect, so we have to leave out a champion. We have to leave out. We try to. I guess if I was running the show, but I had to select them based on this system, I would be determining who's the worst champion, and I would leave them out. So yes, West Virginia would be definitely in the running for me because they won the Big 12 championship.
Skylar, you going to do a sleeper team?
No, I think you pretty much hit on all of it with the playoff stuff, so we'll just leave it as it is.
All right. You want to do disappointing team?
No, that's fine.
All right. Go ahead and do the Will Greer one then.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so Mark, when you look around, the Heisman talk, it's obviously centered around Bryce Love. Justin Herbert's getting some looks, Shea Patterson. But Will Greer, West Virginia quarterback, he's coming back for his second year in this offense, technically his third year in the system. Do you think that Will Greer has what it takes to get that enough interest from the voters to maybe win this trophy and bring it back to Morgantown for the first time in school history? I know the team's probably going to have a 10 or 11 win season, but we've seen Lamar Jackson do it before where I believe he only won, 8 or 9 games when he won it that year.
Yes.
Can he have that kind of year to where even if the team doesn't live up to the expectations as a 10-win team, can he still win that thing?
So I'll say yes. I think that there are basically 3 factors that go into Heisman voting. Number 1 would be, as you mentioned, winning. Winning players on championship teams playing in important games in November get the spotlight and get the attention, and rightfully so. They're playing in important games. That's number 1. Number 2 is statistics, especially at the positions that are up for the Heisman. We look at stats, and if you have glittering stats like Lamar Jackson did 2 years ago, his stats won him the Heisman. He had video game type stats, and this has happened many times, and it typically happens where the stats are just mind-boggling and they overwhelm us. The other would be plays that we remember. Did that guy make plays that were just either they were so freakishly athletic that everybody just oohed and awed, and even though it was 45-0, it was just this crazy Odell Beckham Jr. kind of catch, or a play that just was mind-boggling? Or did they make the plays that won the games? So did they make the memorable plays? I think those are the 3 things that stand out in the minds of voters. I don't think there's any question that Will Greer is a little bit behind the curve in regards to Heisman candidacy because if his team, well, let me flip it around. He's going to have the advantage most likely of winning games early that puts him in position to set the stage for November and playing those huge games where hopefully his team has a chance to pull off a Big 12 title. And even if he loses a couple of those games and they don't quite get it done, if he's throwing for 380 and 4 TDs against Texas or Oklahoma and they lose 42-38, hey, that might be enough for people to say, hey, this guy's the best. We've seen Robert Griffin and other players like that win or lose multiple games, but they had such great seasons against big opponents that they were identified as the best player.
All right, Mark. Appreciate it, man. That's a lot of good stuff bringing at us there. I like the new scheduling system. I'm all for it. I'm bought in on it, to be honest.
I think it's just
like it.
I think it's just my campaign to become commissioner of college football.
Well, you got our vote, so there's 2 right there.
Nice.
There's 2.
I like it.
Go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you at. Twitter, anywhere you want to go. So
basically, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Just go to YouTube, search Mark Rogers TV, or make it easier on yourself. Just go to MarkRogersTV.com. You can find me right there. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. Just search Mark Rogers TV.
Awesome, Mark. Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, guys.
That was great, man. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, that was good. I like it.
Yeah, we had Tim Brando. We had him on the show.
Oh, nice.
And had had you, so we had some similar conversations, but we obviously when we talk on the show, we just do strictly WVU. So when we get guys like you or Tim on, we kind of expand it to college football, and that's when we get the bulk of our knowledge heading into the year. So that's good.
So you get Tim Brando on, and then you still delve down to grab me to bring me on as well, and you're getting the big guest in Tim Brando. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, we've had him on 2 years in a row now. He's one of the best guys we've ever interviewed. I mean, he's just like I mean, goodness, you answer a question and just go and run with it. I mean, he just basically gave us a college football preview in 40 minutes, and it was unreal.
Sure, I bet.
We're trying to get Joel Clyde on, but it's been tough to get a hold of him. So
yeah, I bet. How did you guys track down Brando?
Actually, our site manager, John, he was just sifting through social media and was trying to figure out a way, and he found his Facebook page, and it had his messages open. So we messaged his Facebook, and they messaged back, and it was actually his daughter that runs the Facebook and that sets up all of his interviews and everything. So she messaged back, and she said, yeah, just let me know what day, what time it works best for you,
Well,
what topics are going to be, and we'll do it.
The first time we had to get so many retweets.
Yeah.
So many retweets. The first last year, there was so many retweets. And so obviously we got out, put it on our account, like, hey guys, retweet, we'll get Tim Brando on. A bunch of people retweeted it.
Oh, okay.
It was enough that he decided to come on. I don't even know how many it ended up being.
So I never thought of that.
It was it wasn't a set number because he didn't even know. We just put it out there because I was thinking of just random, personalities. I said, retweet if you'd like to have Tim Brando on the show. This is before I think we even reached out to him. And we tagged him in the tweet, and he must have saw it and saw that there was interest. So I think that's how that kind of happened.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
But awesome, man. We'll probably try to get. I'm sure if on our end we're not so confident on it, but if we are in the playoff talk, I'm sure we'll get you on because we'll be fired up. If we're not, it's big if. Obviously, we have to get by Oklahoma. We just lost both times by 28. I don't know how you flip that around after 1 year. Understandably, they don't have Baker Mayfield, but they kind of reload the talent. So hopefully, we're in that conversation in Arlington. Just want to try to get through the year, and we can get you on. See if we can't get our fan base riled up even more.
That would be great. I've got a low battery, and I was searching around for my charger, so I was hoping I wasn't going to ditch you guys. Unfortunately, it hung on, but it may lose you at some point here soon. But I appreciate you guys reaching out to me, and Skylar's been a great guest twice for me, and so just stay in contact.
Absolutely, man. Thanks.
We'll send you the link when it's up and everything.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it should be this Sunday.
Very nice.
It'll be your episode, so it'll just be yours.
Very cool.
Awesome.
All right, thank you, Mark.
All right, Chris. Skylar, have a good night.
You too.
All right, folks. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football on Dub V Nation. And when I've got that link after they produce their podcast, I will pass that along. But to anyone that was watching the live stream, obviously you heard me. What I was about to say was hopefully you got to hear them well through the speaker. Skylar was loud enough, I think, and maybe not so much with Chris. All right. I am about to wrap it up. Unless you guys have anything for me, I'm always here to answer questions. NCIS Fanatic 21. Who is Tim Brando? Really? I have never been disappointed by any of your comments concerning college football and your knowledge of any personnel, whether on the field, on the sideline, in the booth. Tim Brando is funny. I don't remember the subject, but maybe 5 years ago, we had a bit of a Twitter fight. He made some ignorant comment concerning something in college football, and I jumped on him, and we went back and forth. That's my one interaction with Tim Brando. All right, guys. Again, the videos are coming. My previews and predictions on Pac-12 football, and then the rest of the Power 5. so we get you set for 2018. Tomorrow night, we've got Michigan football talk at roughly 10 o'clock Eastern time with James Yoder. And also, again, if you shop on Amazon, please use the links and shop and do whatever you'd like. And yes, to the chagrin of one Navy Thomas, we will have a Patreon page here very soon, and we will get you on board there. Whatever the Mark Rogers TV club list, whatever we're going to call it, it's available. Please leave me your email address and name at MarkRogersTV@gmail.com, and we'll put you on the mailing list, and we will get that started week 1 with channel updates, my take on the college football weekend each and every week, and also stats, trends, information that you won't find anywhere else. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I appreciate you guys joining the live stream for Oklahoma Football Talk, and then my little podcast guest appearance with Dub V Nation. We will be back tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. Meanwhile, I'm going to be talking some Washington football here very soon and getting that out to you. See you next time.